Unable to stand, covered in his own urine, a Minnesota postal worker rolls around on a jail cell floor, arrested for a crime he did not commit.
They thought he was high, but he was dying. A 50-year-old man, a U.S. postal worker, a father, a husband, a man who dedicated his life to serving his community, would spend his final hours begging for help that never came, and the people who could have saved him didn't. This is the heartbreaking story of Kingsley Fifi Bimpong, a man whose last moments were spent in a jail cell, alone, while having a massive stroke. Before we get into this story, please take a second to subscribe and turn on notifications, not just to support the channel, but to help bring attention to stories like this, stories that deserve to be heard.
Police report: Kingsley was extremely confused.
Where do you live?
I don't know.
It was November 16, 2024 in Eagan, Minnesota. It started like any normal workday for Kingsley. He worked for the U.S. Postal Service. His co-workers described him as reliable, hardworking, and always smiling. But that day, something wasn't right. He told his supervisor he had a bad headache. He said his vision felt blurry, so he decided to go home early, thinking maybe he just needed to rest. But as he got into his car and started to drive, his condition began to spiral. He started drifting into oncoming traffic. He struck a curb, and before long, police lights flashed behind him. When officers approached his car, they noticed something strange. He wasn't making sense. His speech was slurred. He seemed confused and unsteady on his feet. To them, it looked like a DUI. They thought he was high or under the influence. But what they didn't know was that Kingsley was in the middle of a massive hemorrhagic stroke, a brain bleed that was cutting off his ability to move, speak, and even think clearly.
Evaluator, or DRE, responded. Their officers, specially trained to detect drug-impaired drivers and spot the difference from those having a medical emergency. But instead of doing the evaluation he was trained to, records filed in a federal lawsuit show the officer is heard on body cam saying it would just be a whole bunch of time wasted. Instead, Kingsley was charged with DWI and sent to Dakota County Jail. As he lay on the floor, in obvious distress, guards documented inmate and cell okay.
The officers called in a drug recognition evaluator, or DREA specialist trained to tell if someone is on drugs. But according to the lawsuit filed later, that officer didn't even complete the full exam. He skipped basic steps. He didn't check Kingsley's pulse. He didn't ask key questions that could have revealed this was a medical emergency. Instead of seeing a man who needed help, they saw a suspect. So instead of taking him to a hospital, they took him to the police station. At the station, they drew his blood. Still convinced this was a drug case. Then, they sent him to Dakota County Jail for booking. By now, Kingsley could barely stand. His condition was worsening fast. He was showing every sign of a neurological emergency: drooping face, slurred speech, loss of coordination, but no one recognized it. Or maybe, no one cared to look closer. When Kingsley was placed in his cell, things took a darker turn. He started collapsing, losing control of his body, and writhing on the ground in pain. He even lost control of his bladder, something that should have been an obvious sign that something was terribly wrong. But instead of rushing in to help, guards walked past his cell over and over again. They ignored him for hours. Surveillance footage cited in the lawsuit reportedly shows jail staff looking into his cell, but doing nothing. Kingsley was dying, right in front of them.
Unable to stand, covered in his own urine, a Minnesota postal worker rolls around on a jail cell floor, arrested for a crime he did.
Over 3 hours passed before a nurse finally came to check on him. By then, it was too late. She found him cold to the touch, unresponsive. She tried Narcan, the drug used to reverse opioid overdoses, because again, they still thought he was high, but Narcan didn't work, because there were no drugs in his system. There was only bleeding deep inside his brain. He was finally rushed to a hospital, but by that point, the damage was irreversible. Doctors performed a scan and found a massive hemorrhagic stroke, a severe brain bleed. He was declared brain dead soon after. 3 days later, on November 19, 2024, his family made the painful decision to remove him from life support. Toxicology results later confirmed what should have been obvious from the start. There were no drugs, no alcohol, no criminal behavior, just a man having a medical emergency and a system that failed him. In the months that followed, Kingsley's family searched for answers. They wanted to know, how could this happen? How could trained officers and jail staff mistake a stroke for drug use? Why didn't anyone call for medical help sooner? In October 2025, they filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against the City of Eagan and Dakota County. The lawsuit accuses police and jail staff of deliberate indifference, meaning they ignored clear signs of medical distress. A state investigation into the incident revealed even more failures. Some jail staff weren't properly certified. Others had let their medical training expire, and they failed to document critical details about Kingsley's condition while he was in their care. The City of Eagan called his death tragic, but claimed that his medical condition wasn't objectively serious or obvious to the officers involved. Dakota County declined to comment, citing ongoing litigation, but to Kingsley's family and to anyone who reads the details, it's hard to accept that explanation. Because the signs were there, the symptoms were clear, and the cost of ignoring them was a man's life. This story isn't just about one man. It's about what happens when assumptions replace empathy. When people in power stop seeing someone as a person and start seeing them as a problem. Kingsley didn't need handcuffs. He needed help. He didn't need a jail cell. He needed a hospital bed, but the system failed him. Step by step, from the roadside, to the station, to the jail. Imagine if just one person had stopped and said, "Something's not right. Let's get him checked by a doctor." Just one person could have saved him, but no one did, and that silence cost him his life. In his final hours, Kingsley lay on a cold floor, confused and alone. While people walked past, assuming the worst about him, they thought he was high, but he was dying. And that's the kind of tragedy that stays with you, not just because of how it happened, but because of how easily it could have been prevented. Today, his family continues to fight for justice, not just for Kingsley, but for anyone who's ever been dismissed, ignored, or misjudged in their moment of need. Their lawsuit isn't just about money. It's about accountability. It's about forcing change in how police and correctional officers respond to medical emergencies. Because if this can happen to a 50-year-old postal worker, a man with no drugs in his system, no crime committed, then it can happen to anyone. And that's what makes this story matter. It's not just about one failure. It's about a pattern of people not being believed, not being helped, not being seen as human first. And every time it happens, another family is left asking the same heartbreaking question. Why didn't they help? Kingsley's story is painful to hear, but it deserves to be told. Because stories like this remind us what compassion looks like and what happens when it's missing. If you're watching this right now, take a second to think about how many people have been written off because they looked high, or acted strange, or didn't make sense. Sometimes, what looks like a crime is actually a cry for help. To Kingsley's family, we see you. To everyone who has ever been ignored in their moment of pain, we see you too. May this story spark change in policy, in training, and in heart, because no one should ever die on a cold cell floor. While the world mistakes their suffering for guilt, he didn't need cuffs. He needed care. If you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, please subscribe, like, and share this video. It helps more people see what really happens behind those locked doors, and it helps keep Kingsley's story and his fight for justice alive.